It is my great pleasure to welcome Simon to us this evening. You know what it's about because we've advertised that. Simon will tell you more about it. We're especially grateful to him because he had a family bereavement very recently, so thank you very much for being Simon. We really appreciate it in an extra positive way there. So Simon, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Do you leave the lights on or, yeah?
Probably leave them on.
Leave them on, fine, okay, you can see the photos. That's great, good. It's really nice to be here. And I'm looking forward to talking about this trip that we did, organised by St Pancras Cruising Club some 8 years ago. Please do sort of interrupt me as I go along if there's something you don't understand. There will be some photographs that I can't remember where they are, so feel free to help me out as I go along. But if you see something in one of the photos and you wonder what that is, then please do interrupt as we go along. So this was a trip that the club organised back in 2016. We took 11 narrowboats down to the Medway from the centre of London and then brought 10 of them back a month or so later after exploring the Medway. I'll tell you what happened to the other boats a little bit later on. As well as the sort of cruise itself, I hope it'll be interesting if I try and give you a bit of a flavour about the sort of organisation of the trip and sort of how we planned it behind the scenes. So we start off with a briefing session at the Cruising Association in Limehouse, right next door to the lock there. And we start with the basics for the skippers with a map of where we're going from Limehouse. We then stopped overnight at Gravesend on the way, and then we end up at Allington, just outside Maidstone, which is the end of the tidal Medway, and we get back onto Environment Agency waterways up to Tunbridge. We do quite a lot of tideway cruising, mainly on using channel 14 on the VHF radio. This was a complicated trip for the club because we had 3 different VHF frequencies, depending on which part of the river that we were in. And all those stages talking to VTS, which is the Vessel Traffic Services service provided by the Port of London Authority for the River Thames and by Peel Ports for Medway. They describe themselves as air traffic control for boats, which you'll see a bit of that. You'll see a little bit of that later on. So as Andy Spring, who's the other organiser with me, I went on his boat. I was crew on his boat. And here we are about to start the briefing with lots of handouts for the crew, including signs to put in the windows of your boat so that everybody else knows what you're supposed to be doing, even if you don't. So that's showing what order you need to be in when you get to Tilbury, what mooring you're going on when you get to Queenborough, and then where you're going when you head on up the Medway. Andy was very keen that I, as his crew, should be a competent crew, so not a passenger. So that meant knowing how to operate the boat, so that I could steer the boat if he was incapacitated or had to take a break, or where the fuel shut-off valve was, rather than just knowing that there was one somewhere. And also I was in charge of making toast. So for that I consulted the WURG website, where they have a very nice guidance note on how to make toast, including don't butter the bread before you put it in the toaster. And use toaster tongs. Rather sadly, this page is no longer on the revamped IWA website. It's full of stuff about how to operate dumper trucks and working at height and sort of real health and safety, as it were. But as well as myself, I had lots of gadgets and stuff that I took with me, and there are the toaster tongs, although I never actually used them. The other thing that I was quite involved in was the passage plan. This is a bit different from Canal cruising because it's actually quite hard to work out where you are. As you'll see later on, it's a pretty featureless part of the river. So we rely on the buoys. The charts are over there if you want to have a look. That's sort of how we navigate down the river. And buoys are red and green, which is a bit of a challenge for me because I'm red-green colourblind. Normally you have red ones on one side and green ones on the other. But on this trip, this is the return trip from Queenborough to Limehouse, they jump about all over the place from left to right, and I'll explain why that happens a bit later on. So, and they're all clearly marked, as you'll see, so you know where you are. So if there is the serious point here is make sure you don't get lost and go up the wrong channel. But also, if you do have a problem and you need to call for the Coast Guard or the lifeboat, then at least you know where you are, rather than saying, well, I think I went under the Dartford Bridge about 2 hours ago, which is not very helpful. We also had sort of estimated timings, which were actually not too bad on the outbound trip, just so you've got some idea of when you're going to get to the next buoy. Obviously, they're very approximate, and there's a 15-minute difference between the front boat and the rear boat, so it's all a bit approximate. So we did this trip going down in 3 days and 2 days coming back. So day one, Limehouse to Gravesend. There we are, assembling in the basin at Limehouse, and then pop along Limehouse Cut and through Bow Locks, which are being used nowadays, I have to say, less and less. They're really hard to get a booking. You have to book a week in advance. They are very temperamental. The electrics quite often decides not to play, so it's very much a sort of use it or lose it. And you can see this boat Joseph on the left, who've done a lot of work on their improvised cratch cover with a large sheet of plastic, and they've also put an inflatable boat on the back, so they're obviously feeling a bit nervous about the trip. And then we head down Bow Creek. I think this is towards the end. We're just about to go under the Lower Lee crossing, and then we get to the main river, and there's the O2 on the right and the cable car over the river. At which point we announce our presence to London VTS and say we're proposing to cross the river extremely slowly and get to the other side. And they either say wait a bit or go. And then and there's one of the Uber clippers who are bombing along at 30 knots along this part of the river. And then here we are heading downstream towards the barrier. That's the city of Westminster on the right, which is one of the sand dredgers that goes out into the estuary, fills up with sand, brings it back to Charlton, and goes up the conveyor belt into the massive cement works there. Big operation run by Tarmac, so they're discharging there. At this point, the harbour master called us up on the radio and said, could you please get into a single file? So we had a go at doing that as we go through the barrier between the green arrows, so that we head through the barrier. Not very brilliant weather, I'm afraid. It always seems to be a bit grotty in this part of London, but not a lot of sun. Then we go past the outfall from the southern outfall sewer at Crossness. Most of the boats went to the right of this obstacle. We, of course, knew our buoys, and so we went to the north, because that's what those cones mean. But actually, there's plenty of water on the wrong side, so nobody ran aground. And then nothing very much happens. There's not a lot to look at in the river until we get to the Dartford crossing. We seem to have got out of single file again, but never mind. The river's plenty wide enough here, and we start seeing some quite big ships. So this is one of the regular freight cross-channel ferries that just takes lorries backwards and forwards across the channel. And this is an oil tanker which I think it's 4,500 tonnes. I looked it up yesterday. It was currently in France, just near Le Havre, filling up with bitumen. So yeah, we keep well away from that, and you may see the sign saying no smoking. So quite a few of the ships said that. And then we arrive at Gravesend, where we moor up onto the jetty there. So to explain that, I did a little animation. Here we are coming down river, and then turning round. The tide is still going quite strongly from left to right at this point, so all the boats turn around. That one went a bit too far and got a bit close to the lifeboat, but never mind. And then everybody else joins up, and then in order, when we're ready, we go and moor on the inside of the pontoon. So this whole mooring manoeuvre, that takes sort of a good half an hour to finish and get it sorted out. But it's the key thing is obviously not to rush it. So here we are executing that manoeuvre. I think this was actually on a previous trip. So we were all turning around, facing upstream into the tide, and then going alongside there. That's the old Gravesend ferry, which was replaced 6 or 7 years ago and is now not operating at all. It stopped earlier in the year. I think the two local authorities have not been able to find the money. And then we ended up moored on the inside, and that explains the mooring positions that people were going to on their window sheets in a sort of fairly obvious way. The lifeboat came out to say hello, not because we were in problems, but because one of our skippers is very heavily involved in raising funds for the RNLI. So he got in touch with them and said, could you come and give us a hand? We were joined, I think it's Hull Keel, that boat there, who joined us for this part of the trip, and they needed a bit of a hand to get moored onto the bollard. You can see there's a yellow bollard just there, which was quite hard for them to reach from the deck of that boat. But they got themselves nicely moored up. There's Libby, the skipper of Panacea, with her lifeboat friends. This is one of the 3 lifeboat stations on the Thames that's staffed 24/7, so they can launch within 90 seconds. So that they have a crew there all the time. I think it's a 24-hour shift that they do. So eventually, as I say, we were nicely moored up. That's Tilbury passenger terminal on the other side. Not a huge depth of water at low tide. As you can see, there's quite a lot of mud here. I had a depth sounder on our boat, and that was reading about 3 meters at this point, which is, okay. It's more than a canal, but it's still quite close to the bottom. We then pootled off to explore Gravesend, including a visit to the basin there. This is what's basically the navigable bit that's left of the Thames and Medway Canal that used to cut across the Isle of Grain to Strood. For a few years, the tunnels were shared between boats and trains, which I can't really imagine. And then the canal closed and the railway took it over, and it's used now for the line to Rochester and points to the east. But there's still the canal's still there, and there's a trust that is sort of looking after it and keeping it in reasonable order. And there are plans to clear the industrial estate in the distance, which blocks the first half mile of the canal. There's another view of Tilbury Power Station, and another cross-channel freight ferry. That's the North Sky, which we will see again later on. A very handy landmark, but obviously no longer there, as Tilbury Power Station was demolished about 5 years ago and being replaced with more docks, extension of the Tilbury docks. So there we are, moored up for the evening, where we went off to the pub for dinner. The Humber Keel was riding nicely at their buoy, and we had a nice, quiet, calm evening. They keep operating, throughout the night. This part of the river operates 24/7, just depending on the tides. Most of the wash problems we had were the pilot cutters. The pilots are based here in Gravesend. That's the main PLA headquarters, and they kept bombing off to either put a pilot on a ship or take them off. The ships themselves are actually no problem at all in terms of wash. It's nice, long, gentle wave, but the cutters were a bit of a pain. So we called them up on the radio and said, would you mind going a bit slower? And that was fine. So day 2, Gravesend down to Queenborough, which is sort of near Sheerness on the Isle of Sheppey, just at the entrance to the Medway. So the first thing to do was to make sure all the computers were working. So I had a GPS tracking system. You'll see some of the charts a bit later on, just as a sort of reassurance in case I wasn't sure exactly where we were or how fast we were going or whether we were in the right part of the river. And Andy was running, I think that's Shipfinder on his laptop, which in theory is a website that enables you to see what all the other ships are doing. Bigger ships and some narrowboats, there are a few that have it, a system called AIS, which basically regularly broadcasts where you are, how big you are, how many people you've got on board, and where you're going. And that's quite handy to get a bit of advance warning. So we sort of did the reverse manoeuvre from mooring up. And then headed off downriver from Gravesend. We left at about half tide, so with the tide running at probably 2.5, 3 knots, pushing us along. So, really quite a good shove to get us downriver. Let's pass one of the tugs, proper sort of seagoing tug that was again, quite a number of those are based in Gravesend. Because of the strength of the tide and the amount of time it took to get everybody unmoored and out of position, we would have got extremely spread out if we'd just gone, and it would have taken a long time to get the convoy back into some sort of organisation. In theory, everybody should be capable of operating independently, but obviously there's a lot of advantage in being, 100, 150 feet gaps from the other boats. So how we dealt with that was that after heading downriver, we turned and faced into the tide. So all the boats did a 180-degree turn and just stopped, and then all the other boats came and did the same, and then waited behind them. And then when we were all there, as lead boat, we did another 180-degree turn and set off. So that's what we're doing here. All the other boats have turned around and are facing upriver, and we're zooming down with the tide. That's just a view looking back to Gravesend, and you can see some of the boats further back in the convoy. So the tide is, one of the boats was doing over 7 knots at this point as we were zooming down, and Gravesend Pier in the distance. And then we got to our first lot of buoys on the passage plan. So can anyone see what's odd about this photograph? Got a green buoy on the far side of the river and a red one on our side of the river. Well, the odd thing is we're not going between them. So yeah, we are on the right side of the river because it's red on the right going downstream. But normally you would go between the red buoy and the green buoy, but we're not. And the reason for that, we're here at Lower Hope, which is just west of Canvey Islands. Gravesend and Tilbury are down here. And at this point you get into a sort of traffic separation scheme where only the big ships are allowed to go in the buoyed channel, and we go just outside it. So we take that course there. You can see the dotted lines mark the main channel, and there's a line of buoys on both sides, and we go the wrong side of those buoys, just to the south in this bit of water here, trying to avoid all this sand here, which obviously dries out at low water. So on both sides of the Thames there are sort of small ship channels with two-way traffic, where all the little stuff goes and keeps out of the way of the big ships, which is quite reassuring, really. And then we go around the corner to Thames Gateway. This was 8 years ago, so it's developed really quite a lot since then, but it was open when we went past. You will see some ships on the way back. There was nobody when we were there. And again, you can see quite clearly on the buoy the strength of the current. This one is obviously, as we're going around a corner, the tide is pushing us sideways. And then, we start to get overtaken by, this is one of the roll-on freight ferries, so they start to overtake us. But it's fine. It's why the radio is so helpful, because they have to get permission from VTS before they depart. They give 10 minutes warning. They report where they are regularly as they go past particular points. So we just listen out, and we know that something big is coming up behind us and will catch up with us in 15 or 20 minutes. So there's plenty of time. And obviously they're in the deep water channel for big boats, and we are not. This is the most challenging part of the navigation. So this is a buoy called Mid Blythe. You can see it on the charts there, and you have to try and work out where to go from that point, which there's really nothing. The next buoy was over 3 miles away, but with good binoculars and sort of reasonable visibility, we could see it. We could see it quite clearly. You could see a line of 4 buoys, and you could identify which one was which, and you could work out which gap you needed to go in. So it's relatively straight. Well, if the weather is reasonable, then obviously if the weather isn't, we don't go, because this is a very exposed bit of water. But if the weather is reasonable, you can see where you need to go next. The other challenge, which was more of a challenge coming back, is you not only want to go there, but you want to go on a straight line. And that is more difficult. without having a GPS tracker or proper compasses or being able to do the sums to allow for side winds and side currents, which is a little bit beyond us. So we had to watch out for that, and you'll see an example of that later on. So there we go past the last buoy for 3 miles or so. So we're now up here at the mid-Blythe point, and the main channel of the river, as I said, marked by red buoys, is up there, and we follow this line of buoys which takes us round to the Medway. Sheerness and the Isle of Sheppey is here, a very obvious landmark, and the key navigational issue here is to resist the temptation to take a shortcut. Now, a shortcut is a bad idea for 2 reasons. Firstly, the chart says there's a firing practice area, which doesn't sound very friendly. And secondly, obviously, oops, what have I done there? Secondly, obviously, this green area is going to dry out at low tide. So it's really quite important that we don't take that shortcut. So that, again, is just a question of following the buoys, making sure we know where the next one is, and sticking to the right channel. So we need to go around that way. That does take us rather close, of course, to the SS Montgomery, which you can still see the masts. They've been trying to work out for the last few years how to get rid of these. So this is a World War II ship full of explosives that sank in, I think, 44, something like that. It's still there. It's still full of explosives. If it went bang, it would make a very large bang indeed. There are, as you can see, a number of buoys around it to make sure you keep out of the way, but I'm not sure that would be a huge amount of protection. So we kept well away from that. That again is us being overtaken by another cruiser. And we had a bit of rough weather at this point as well, so it was a good idea to close the bow doors, which is part of the briefing for skippers. I should have said earlier on that of the 11 boats, 9 went down together in the main group, and then for sort of diary reasons, the last 2 boats, including Andrew Fazy, who has been our Commodore and Vice Commodore for many years in the past, they came down a couple of weeks later when the weather was a little bit more interesting. So you're pointing, it's right out, this is a straight river right out to the sea. There's nothing between you and Holland. As you can see, there's a nice wind coming straight from the east, somewhere between a force 3 and a force 4. And as you can see, the self-draining gas locker on Andrew's boat is working nicely. But there's no rolling, as you can see. And actually, Andrew's is a 45-foot boat, and I know the pitching looks alarming, but I think it is actually safer than not pitching. When we have done some tideway trips with very heavy full-length narrowboats, particularly old working boats, and they just go in a straight line, and they don't pitch up and down when the waves go up and down, and that can cause a few. That makes me a bit more nervous, to be honest. Pitching is a bit uncomfortable. It might make somebody seasick, but it's unlikely to sink you. And obviously, there's no rolling going on there. Anyway, back to the calmer weather as we're heading down Sea Reach. So Canvey Island in the distance and sort of Southend over there on the right. One of our skippers decided to go a bit off-piste at this point because he has a mate who has a sailing yacht who came out to have a look and see if he was doing okay. And then after, this is probably 2.5 hours or so after leaving Gravesend, we get to the North Swatch Buoy, which is that right-angled bend I showed on the chart. That's Southend and Shoebury-Ness in the distance on the other side, and we do a 90-degree turn around the buoy. Were you on for that trip? You're not on this one, no. I couldn't remember if you were or not. So here we are going round the North Swatch Buoy, reasonably close together so that we can help each other out if there's a problem. And then as we start to head up the Medway, We're going round the corner there, and then we have a slightly different design of green and yellow buoys because it's a different harbour authority, but it's still a green cone. And then that's the entrance to the Medway. That's the port of Sheerness, and Medway VTS are in the top of the tower there. We went down a couple of months beforehand to do a recce and to go and meet them and talk to them about what we were going to do. They thought we were completely mad, but they said, "That's the Montgomery over there. Don't miss that. And make sure you go around that buoy over there." We could just about see sort of 3 miles in the distance. But this is all operated from Liverpool now, so if you call them up on the radio, you're talking to somebody in Liverpool who works for Peel Ports, who does VTS for a number of different ports at the same time. I mean, to be fair, they're really not interested in what we're doing. I mean, they're very friendly, but you know, we call them up and tell them what we're doing mainly to announce our presence to everybody else, and they then repeat it back and broadcast it so that everybody knows there's a group of narrowboat enthusiasts that they need to look out for. So you know, it doesn't really matter that they're not, for us, that they're not on the scene. And then we have another nice landmark of the Isle of Grain power station on the way in. That's the port. That's one of the forts marking the entrance. But again, sadly, that landmark is no longer there. And Sheerness is in the distance, and the Isle of Sheppey. So we're now heading up the Medway. I don't know what we were going through there, but it smelt very strange. I think it must have come from the disused power station. Goodness knows what they were doing. But yeah, we're now heading up towards the Medway, and then splitting into 2 groups. So 5 of the boats stopped at Queenborough, which is just to the north of the Isle of Sheppey, and the others carried on to Rochester and Maidstone. They wanted to get further on, so we split into 2 groups at that point. Came across another buoy with cones on the top. I always have to think about whether you go to the west or the east of this one. Thank you, very good, that's right. So here we're going into the Swale, which is the channel to the south of the Isle of Sheppey. At this point, met up with my sister, who was come out to look for us. So she was on the bank taking photographs of us, and gave me a call on the phone, and that's me on the boat trying to find her. I never did until we moored up. And then we spent the night in the harbour at Queenborough. Very nice, friendly sort of harbour trust who manage the moorings there. The thing I like about this chart is what it says at the bottom: not to be used for navigation. Sort of wonder. I think I know what they mean by that, but it's and the PLA chart for recreational users says the same thing as well: not to be used for navigation. So I don't know quite what else you're supposed to use it for. But anyway. The sort of visitor moorings there's a concrete barge here and a number of other buoys that we were using. So we went to look for the concrete barge, which is still, I think, is World War II vintage and still floating, and tied ourselves up to that. We've turned around to face towards the way out. And they run a little trot boat, a little ferry that just you call them up on the radio and they come and pick you up and take you off to the land. So here's my sister and brother-in-law arriving with cake and provisions, and just to say hello. And that's their view from the trot boat. And again, by this time, again, the conditions were very sheltered. Really, it's, you know, once you're out of the really wide, exposed part of the river, it's really quite sheltered. So we had a relaxed evening there and walked around Queenborough at low tide. All sorts of interesting boats of sorts that we weren't quite used to, but I'm sure you are in this part of the world. And I keep meaning to look up the history of this. It doesn't really look as though it floats, but it obviously does. And then here we are on the way back from the pub in the evening, and you can see there's a long walkway that takes you out to the bit of the marina that is, or the boatyard that is always floating, and then we get the last trot boat at 9 o'clock. And then the following day, 4 of us set off from Queenborough to head up the Medway to Rochester. The fifth boat decided they didn't fancy that, so they went down past Famersham and hopped over the channel to Calais, which that's another story. But the weather was, they were very lucky actually, the weather was absolutely perfect. They were expecting to have to wait in Ramsgate for a week, but they got there, the safety boat was ready, their pilot was ready, so they went. And they're still there, I think. They write for Waterways World occasionally. That you may have seen, called Sarah, I think, the skipper. Anyway, so we wished them luck and said, yeah, hope you get there. And we carried on up the Medway, getting some more cranes. Quite a wide expanse of water, you can see that from the chart. And then before, it's not a very long trip, and before long we're at Chatham, and that's up Castle on the other side. So lots of forts in the Medway, obviously a very important naval port in times gone past, and lots of good views of Chatham dockyards as we go past. I finally got round to visiting the Dockyards Museum earlier in the year, and particularly if you're called a Midwife fan, it's well worth a visit. Absolutely fascinating place, well worth a day out. There's an extremely claustrophobic submarine with two very large diesel engines in a really claustrophobic tube. I began to feel quite ill after 10 minutes in this submarine, which is unusual for me. I don't normally get claustrophobia, but combination of the smell and the smoke was really not very nice. And if you want some rope, then there's a wonderful traditional ropery, quarter-mile long, and one of those shops that you really shouldn't go in unless you want to spend quite a lot of money. And some quite nice ships around, so there's the Kent, which you can see, and also a Clyde Puffer, the Vic 96 in the background. Anyway, we overtook the Sailor yacht, which we were quite pleased about. It's quite unusual in narrowboats that we overtake anything, but we did manage that on this occasion. There's a bit of light coastal traffic in Rochester, and then my bit of the Tideway trip ended in Rochester. You can see the cathedral and the castle there, and there are some nice pontoon moorings just upstream of the railway bridge and the road bridge in Rochester, which I think is still there. They're sort of run by the council. They've had some difficulty with long-term moorers there, but I think they've now managed to move them on and make them available for visiting boats. For you expect, if you're planning to stop there, it's quite nice if there is actually somewhere to moor when you get there. We had about a month. Most of the boats had a month on the non-tidal Medway. Sadly, I didn't get to enjoy any of that, so I put in some photographs from other people. But this is where we get to the bits where I'm not quite sure where places are. So do shout out and help me if you can. The last time I gave this talk was to the IWA in Gravesend, and they did jolly well. So I'm not expecting, given where you are, I'm not expecting you to do quite as well.
Wrong side for us.
It is, I know. It's not. It's not really fair. But anyway, let's give it a go. So, but before long, I think this was one of the boats that went straight on up to Maidstone on the night. So here they're quite late in the evening at the lock at Allington, just outside Medway, so locking off the Tideway, and then a really very nice rural river. This is somewhere near a lock. This is a lock. This is a nice meadow with moorings on. Really very nice countryside. I sent these photographs round to the skippers a couple of weeks ago and say, can you identify any of these places? And they didn't do very well either, I'm afraid. But they did remind me that this was Hadlow Tower, which obviously is a bit of a clue because it's a big tower, and there's quite a good view from the top of that. And then most of the other photos I've got sort of quite low bridges in Tonbridge. So here we are, sort of squeezing under. This is Libby again with Panacea. She's got a nice sort of 30-foot boat, so it's very sort of enthusiastic in getting to places. Tonbridge also has a castle, and I think that's a different low bridge. I think Libby is one of the boats that has AIS. I think that's what the Garmin box is for, but I'm not absolutely sure. We had some fine weather when we were there, and we got right up to the head of navigation. So this is the sort of automatic sluice, the lee barrier, just upstream from Tonbridge, which is as far as you can get. And that's Heather on Bleasdale, one of our other skippers, determined to get under a rather low bridge. Heather obviously likes going under bridges. I think the last bridge I went under with her was this one, which is this is the Humber Bridge on the way to Hull, but that again is another story. Some very old, nice old stone bridges on this river. I think it's a bit further upriver than that. I have got the map. We can try and work it out. I think there is a photograph, but I can't remember where it is. But the lock is very close to the bridge, so we can work out which one that is. I should have annotated the slide. And Andy, one of the other skippers, just bought a new inflatable kayak, so he had some fun trying that out, and also going down the canoe pass, which he insisted I put that photograph in to show him whizzing down the canoe path. And I've no idea what's happening here. But note the fire underneath the bath, so this is obviously a very effective way of warming yourself up. But I wasn't there, I don't know what happened. So that's the non-tidal Thames. I rejoined Andy on Arthur Dent for the return trip from Maidstone down to Queenborough, and the weather promptly turned absolutely foul. Had a best part of a day with very heavy rain, going through the middle of Maidstone, down to the lock at Allington. At this point my camera started to get really rather soggy. Out onto the tideway, so we had most of the boats with us at this point. I think a couple had gone further, and here we are heading down the tideway. So this is Yolding, which is basically the only bridge between Maidstone and Rochester. And then there's another church, and quite windy, and a few chalk cliffs in the distance. And that's a new bridge that's being built just upstream from Rochester, and that's the M20 Eurostar and Eurostar rail bridge just on the outskirts of Rochester, and you can, I think, see the castle in the distance. I think that is. Chatham again. My camera's getting very wet. And then the weather suddenly decided to improve, and we got almost a bit of sun and absolutely flat calm. This was actually quite navigated. There weren't that many buoys on this part of the river, and it was quite easy to get lost. And the lead boat did nearly get slightly lost at one point because they went off a channel that looked as though it probably was the right way, but absolutely wasn't. But we didn't lose them. And oh yeah, sorry, you can just see in the distance the bridge that goes over to the Isle of Sheppey, which is quite often closed in sort of very foggy weather. It's a bit vulnerable to that. And that's Libby on Panacea again. Some more cranes, and then we tied up. So I think we had 6 boats tied up onto the concrete barge, and another 4 a little way away, just riding at one of the buoys. So just more at one end, and you go round in circles depending on what the tide does. And we decided to have a party on the concrete barge. One of our skippers, Sue, you can see there, is a prize-winning jam maker. So she makes a special jam for each of these occasions and gives us nice labelled pots. So we were having scones and jam and cream, which was, I'm not sure that had ever happened on the concrete barge before. There's a nice evening view. And then the sort of final day on day 5, returning back to Limehouse. So a very early start because of the tides. So we were setting off just after 5 in the morning in order to get to the junction with the main river at low tide. The key issue here is looking at the wind. So, and you have to be quite careful, because particularly when you're in Queenborough, the temptation to go is quite strong. You want to get home, and if you don't, it's very inconvenient. But it's not as inconvenient as something going wrong on the tideway. So we do set quite strict criteria for what the wind is going to be, and we keep an eye on that. So I spent sort of 3 or 4 days beforehand sort of tracking the weather forecast and looking see how similar the two forecasts were, and we had a reasonable degree of consensus that it was 10 to 13 miles an hour from the north, which is fine. If it had been from the east behind us, it would have been a bit more challenging. So we decided to go on that basis. So here we are at 4:30 in the morning, which is quite, even in June, is pretty nearly dark. The crew looking a little bit liverish, not terribly enthusiastic about this, but we decided to go. Navigation lights were on, as you can see. That's Andy getting ready to call up VTS and tell them that we were setting off, which I think did surprise them a bit, although we had warned them in advance. And then off we go. And here we are, forming up into something like a straight line and going past the port of Sheerness. Didn't really seem very busy, Sheerness, then. I suspect it's got rather less busy in the intervening years. There were a lot of parked cars there, so that there's clearly some car traffic, but not a lot else. It didn't look a terribly busy port, sadly. But still a reasonable number of tugs sitting around. We then had a yoghurt pot that came and said hello, who was very friendly, if a bit surprised. And before long, and 2 minutes ahead of schedule, we got to the North Swatch buoy, which is the one where we go round the right-angle bend. And you may have realised that it's a brand new buoy, which they've obviously replaced since we were there. It looks completely different. It's got the same name on. I should say the large dent on the side is nothing to do with us. That was there when we got there. And that's again, that's somebody else's GPS track showing the route home. So we're just at the North Swatch there, which is on the eastern end. And then us as lead boat, we're looking back. So these are the boats right at the back coming out of the Medway and then going around this buoy and then heading off. And you can see we've got quite a strong crosswind from the right, and you can see even though the boats are pointing into the wind, we're already quite a way off the line. And as we went further inland, that became more of a problem for the boats at the rear. The tendency to just point your boat at the boat in front and think you're following them is quite strong, but with a crosswind, it doesn't work like that. So one of the boats did touch the bottom briefly on this bit, but it was just sand, and we're on a rising tide, so within 5 minutes they were able to get off. But in particular when you're being blown onto sand or mud, it's quite tricky, because if the wind is really strong, the water goes up, the wind just blows you further on. It's quite a challenge to get unstuck. Anyway, before long we were at the Mid-Swatch buoy, that's south end in the distance on the other side. And again, that's the Mid-Blythe buoy again. So that's the 4 mile gap, 3.5 mile gap that we've just done. And you can see there's a very definite bend in the traffic as people sort of realise they've got to get round to the correct side of that buoy and then get ourselves back in line. And then we were at the Thames Gateway, which had a bit more traffic as we were going past. And there's the boat we saw moored up at Gravesend on the move, the Avalon, the tanker. Sea state was actually fine. It was slightly better than on the outward bound trip, even though the wind was a bit stronger, but it's from the north rather than blasting in from the North Sea. So gave us less in the way of wind. And then at this point, this thing started to appear behind us, which we had known was coming because we'd been listening on the radio. And this is a 400-metre massive container ship, the biggest one. I think it takes 20,000 containers. Absolutely enormous. I think it's still the biggest size of container ship that is going around the seas. It certainly was last time I researched that, but absolutely massive thing. And VTS has spent the previous hour or two making sure that it didn't meet traffic going the other way on a bend. So, they were telling people to speed up and slow down in order to pass on a straight bit of the river, so that this thing has the bends on its own, because it needs it. It needs the full width to get round. And then we also saw this ship here that was actually in the middle of delivering 4 of the cranes. So these cranes are actually on the ship, not on the bank. And you can see the sort of stanchions lashing it to the deck. And they come all the way from China like that. So I think I'd be a bit worried about, but I'm sure the naval engineers, the naval architects had done their sums, and it obviously had got there. And then basically, there was a very funny video about this. Here's the same ship, sort of just before it's turning around. So it's arriving, it turns around, goes sideways onto the bank, and then basically you wait until the tide is right so that the deck of the ship is level with the bank. You then attach an awful lot of steel cables and winches and things, and you winch the thing off quickly. And if it gets stuck, you've got about 10 minutes to get it off before you've got a real problem that you can do nothing about. So, it's one of those things that they clearly plan very carefully, and they pick the right tide so that they do it right at the top of the tide, so at least they've got, the boat staying still for 15, 20 minutes or something. But they got them all off, and, they're obviously the biggest cranes in the world and all the rest of it, and you can see behind the scale of the area that's being redeveloped, and it's obviously expanded a lot since then. So we were obviously well out of the way in the small ships channel, and this thing, I forget its name now, was in the big ships channel, and in fact everything else going outbound was told to get in the small channel as well. So even some of the other ships we saw earlier on, they were told to share the same part of river that we were in. So that was quite fun. That was fun, but we just talked to them on the radio and agreed that we would pass them the wrong side. So there's absolutely no confusion, and they're very good. They're very professional. And it's getting closer and closer, and they're picking up tugs at both ends, and they spin that in the channel, and they take the full width of the dredge channel to turn that ship in, and then moor it up alongside. And there it is that's it being turned, that's right. So they turn it a bit downstream of the Thames Gateway port, and then tow it backwards with the tugs onto the moorings. Meanwhile, the Avalon is out here. So it's quite fun to see some big shipping going on. Obviously, we're going along on the south side of the river at this point, and so our next challenge is how do we get from the south side of the river over to the north side, which we do at an excitingly named place called Mucking Number 5, which is the name of the buoy. So again, the manoeuvre there is we all turn at the same time and go across in a straight line parallel to each other at the same speed. We get to the other side and we all turn and proceed inbound at the same time. So that's the theory, again, we just do that on the radio, saying sort of 3, 2, 1, go, and then we all go and do that together. And the main thing is to actually make a 90-degree turn rather than less than a 90-degree turn, because it's actually quite a long way round in a narrowboat, and also not to adjust the throttle. So, we're going in a convoy, and going at the same speed is quite a challenge. So you just leave your throttles and push hard on the tiller, and round we go. And that's the reality. I could have done with a drone for this one, really, but it's, it wasn't too bad. We got nicely across the river, and there's the GPS track to prove it, that we were more or less in the right place. Mucking Number 5 is there. And then we're getting to a fairly straightforward part of the river now, so it's getting a bit more sheltered. We're going around to the south of this buoy, which is at Tilbury, past the passenger terminal at Tilbury. I hadn't realised until I looked closely on the way past that this whole thing floats. So this whole structure goes up and down, and then there's a bridge linking it to the land, so the cars can get on and off and all the rest of it. And then we went past the dock. This is the lock going into Tilbury Docks, and that's the North Sky that we saw a bit earlier on, if you remember, just as we were arriving in Gravesend. And the lock gates were open, so the North Sky was ready to come out. VTS said, would you mind terribly waiting for 10 minutes because we've got some narrowboats going past, and the skipper said, no, that's absolutely fine. I was quite tempted at this point to take the convoy up the side. As you can see, there's about 15 feet of space. We haven't done this lock, St Pancras Cruising Club, so this did look like a good opportunity to nip down the end. There'd be plenty of space to turn around, and then we could all come back out again. But I think I decided we'd probably get into a bit of trouble if we did that. So we left them alone and went past some more freighters. A couple of nice chaps on there who waved at us. And then once the last boat had gone past, the North Sky was off. And again, getting out of Tilbury, it's a really, when you look at it on the chart, it's a really odd orientation that you point right across the river. That's the line you have to go, because that's the line of the lock. And then you spin and turn by probably 120 degrees to port, and then you head out river. So, and they do that normally without tugs. So, they obviously know what the wind and the currents are doing, and they make good use of their bow thrusters. Heading inland, so we're getting very close to the Channel Tunnel Railway, which goes under at this point. It's one of the areas we just sort of slightly lost concentration, to be honest, as we were going round the corner. And at this point, VTS called us up and said, you're on the wrong side of the river. Would you mind moving over? And if you look at the chart, we were actually on the right-hand half of the river. We were closer to the north bank than we were to the south bank, but the channel goes right round the outside of the bend, and we were on the wrong side of the channel. There wasn't anybody else around. It wasn't dangerous, but the guy in VTS, he was quite nice about it, but he'd obviously rather that we were where we should be. But it was interesting how easy it was to do that. I think we were just we'd been up since 4:30. We were quite tired. We thought we'd done the difficult bit, and that's how mistakes happen. And then back in under the Dartford crossing, past the Woolwich ferry, obviously replaced by the shiny new hybrid electric ones that are there now, much improved boats, including the electromagnetic mooring system that last time I was there is obviously not working. So I have seen it work. So they have electromagnets that grab hold of the boats and hold it into place while all the traffic drives on and off, but it doesn't seem to be working at the moment. So they're using slightly older techniques. And then heading upriver through the barrier, Isle of Dogs and Canary Wharf in the distance. So sorry, that's North Greenwich and the O2 Dome. That's the Greenwich Peninsula. The Isle of Dogs is a bit further up. And that's a photograph from the bank of Andy and me going through the barrier. He got a rather nice set of photos of every boat. And that's looking back with the Tate and Lyle sugar terminal on the left, which does seem to be still in use, not an enormous amount, but I mean the sugar refinery there is still working. And then back onto non-tidal waters at Bowlocks, almost on the level. We arrived right at the top of the tide. Sometimes if there's a particular lockkeeper on duty, they just open the gates at both ends and you just go whizzing through, which is how it was designed originally, because this stretch of the lower Lee was semi-tidal, but for flood defence and other reasons it isn't anymore. And then back into the basin at Limehouse, and then a nice dinner in the Cruising Association to celebrate. And then a few months later, our engraved plaques arrived, and we then started to do a bit of planning for future cruises, including one of them we have thought about coming here. So that's this is the skipper with the friend with the sailing yacht. So he's got as far as working out roughly this is where you would need to come. I went and did a recce by boat, so that's Heybridge, obviously, which you will know very well. On a nice day on the river, and that's me skippering hydrogen. I had a very nice day out from Malden, going up and down the Blackwater. And then that's Osey as well. That again was on another trip. I thought I'd come and do a recce on the Waverley, which is a very nice way to see this part of the river. We had about 10 of us on board, so the skipper allowed us to fly the St Pancras pennant that you can see there on the Waverley, which was rather nice of them. But I think on balance, it's probably going to be a little bit too far. I'm not sure. I mean, it has been done. I know some completely lunatic narrowboaters have done this trip, but 20 odd years ago. But I think probably, sadly, we won't do that. So we'll have to explore the area in other ways. Most of my photographs are on the website for my boats. There's the address if you want to look at those. And I should finish by acknowledging all the other people who took photographs that I've shown tonight. And there we go, that's the end of the talk. We got safely home.
Well, Simon, thank you. I mean, I'm sure there'll be loads of questions. Simon just finished with the credits and having filled us with all sorts of information and so on. I want to go first.
Chair's prerogative, isn't it?
I think it is my prerogative. I mean, knowing narrowboats and so on, the little propeller probably relies on water flowing past the propeller to do any steering, and you're going downstream on the tails with this water that wants to go faster than you. Navigation must be hell. Then you add the wind and the tide in and so on.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I'd say. I mean, we go at a reasonable speed, so we don't go.
Well, presumably you have to go.
Yeah, I mean, but we don't go at more than sort of a decent canal cruising speed. I mean, the main reason for that is that that's a comfortable speed for everybody. If we go any faster, then it's pushing it for somebody. Either something's going to fall off their engine, or they're going to overheat, or something. Yeah. So we just go at a steady cruising speed. That gives us good control. I think the thing that the thing you have to watch out for is most of the time you've got no idea how fast you're going because the banks are so far away, and until you approach an obstacle like a buoy, and then you suddenly realise that you're getting closer to it much faster than you were expecting.
Yes.
So that's all about anticipation, and then the other thing is spotting the clues for a sideways current.
Yeah.
Which is, again, it's like steering in a crosswind, except that if a crosswind blows up, you know about it because, the trees start flapping about and all the rest of it, whereas you don't get much in the way of clues when the direction of the tide changes. So,
well, on a canal, you've got the sides quite close to you, you know what's happening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where, as you could see with the example I showed, you could get a couple of 100 feet out of position without really noticing it. So it's, it is a challenge. I mean, a lot of it is it's really important to have two people on each boat who know what they're doing, so that one person is steering and then the other person can say, "We seem to be in a slightly different bit of the river to everybody else. Are you sure that's right?" Or some comment like that.
It's that way around. It's not they seem to be in a different part of the river.
Well, whatever. Yeah. But you have a discussion, and we had a sort of VHF channel that we used to chat to each other as well. So you could have that conversation if you were concerned.
I mean, even VHF on narrowboats is a bit unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean you couldn't go on a trip like this without it.
No.
We wouldn't take it. But the main tideway trips we do for sort of visiting narrowboats to the sort of Limehouse to Teddington bit, we had 34 boats doing that last year, and a third of them had radios on board.
Oh, okay.
So you've got a point of contact throughout the convoy.
Thank you. Okay, at my selfish turn.
You spoke about a briefing that you had before you set off.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things that could go wrong on narrowboats, and people, different skill levels and all that sort of thing. So, is there any checks? Do you do any checks about this? I mean, I'm thinking of waterproofness of boats, as well as the ability of the person to hold a course and that sort of thing.
Yes. So. yeah, and there's a lot of things that you have to prepare before the briefing session, because it's no point turning up and realising that the chain on your anchor is a tenth of what it needs to be. So the sort of main things are anchor, navigation lights, life jackets for everybody, something to throw if people fall in. Either a life ring or actually a heaving line is better. A well-maintained engine. My particular hobby horse is a clean fuel tank, which is a different thing from a well-maintained engine. There are a lot of narrowboats around the country who have an inch of gunk at the bottom of their fuel tank that will sit there perfectly happily for years on the canals, and their fuel will be beautifully clean, and they change the fuel filter every year and there's nothing in it, no problem at all. An hour on the tideway, you're in a serious problem. So, and that's happened twice to me when I've been crewing for somebody on their boat, and it is a little bit too exciting when you realise that you've got about 30 seconds until the engine fails. So that's the main thing, and then people think about things like most of the stuff is fairly obvious, like keeping the front door shut. We've never had a problem with waves actually dumping in the front of the boat. You get a bit of spray, so you need to have your self-draining cockpit working and not bunged up. We'll get some water in the gas locker, but will come in through the vents and then drain out again. That's what it's there for. The main hazard really is either air-cooled engines that have a bloody big hole in the side of the back of the boat, or some more modern boat designs where they put so much effort into soundproofing the engine and making sure that the decking space is absolutely soundproof, that there's no way for the air to get into the engine. So again, they put a large hole in the side of the boat. So we would advise people to block those up and to basically lift up one of the deck panels in order so the engine can breathe. So that's the sort of main hazard.
So
really.
are there any checks made by quotes the convoy leader?
No, we don't. No, all I've said there, all that stuff I've said is is our advice and guidance. Oh, and navigation lights as well. Sorry, that was the other one. Proper navigation lights, not sort of tiddly things that people often have. So most of those that's our advice, but we have to be quite careful. We don't certify a skipper that they are competent to do this trip for fairly obvious sort of insurance and legal reasons. People are still the skipper of their own boat. They have to have their conversation with their insurer, who may have views on precautions that you need to follow. But there's a limit to what we can do. If somebody says, "Oh yes, I've had my fuel tank emptied out last week and it was fine," and we don't check that's the case.
And the more you do check, the more responsibility you're taking as well, aren't you?
Yeah.
Do they decide a disclaimer or anything?
We do, but it's never been. Yes, and for the summer cruise as well, which is the group of boats here were all experienced tideway skippers. They had led groups of boats on earlier club cruises. They had a good degree of experience. It's more of an issue, I think, where as I say, the regular summer trips that we do for people who are new to the tideway, and some of them just want to be told what to do, but it's not like that really. You can't.
Yeah.
If I'm leading a group of 30 boats, I can't tell them all what to do. Because I can't see what's going on. I'm miles away, literally.
Yeah. Another question? Well, I thought I had to limit you to questions.
I thought the one that disappeared, the
Yes.
one that didn't come up was the one who went to France, presume.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes.
And you said they stayed there?
I think they have. Yes, they've been. Yes, they have. Yeah, and she's still writing occasionally for Waterways World. She had a boat. She had a bookshop on a boat, I think. They took over there.
And presumably quite a lot of cleaning down of the salt water when you get back.
Yeah. I didn't have to do that. I was in charge of the toast. I didn't have to. I didn't have to do the cleaning down of the
I'm a
boat.
bit
So-
concerned about those metal tongs in an
Yeah,
electric toaster. That's worrying me. I think there's a risk assessment needs to have taken place there on the use of those
Rubber
implements.
gloves.
No, but when I've done,
That sort of going to play, especially when it's spraying all over the place, that's going to play hell with so much on an narrowboat, isn't it?
yeah, no, we did. I am quite careful about washing my own boat when I've done a couple of crossings on the wash, and obviously you get quite a lot of salt there.
Yeah,
as well.
yeah. Okay, anything further? We haven't asked anyone online if they want to ask anything, have we?
I think they've all gone actually.
They're all my.
Oh, dear.
It's my family, and they've said goodbye.
That's
which
it
is fine.
enough.
That's it enough.
Well, I mean, finally then, if you should want to come round and come up with Blackwater and stop at Haybridge Basin, we'd love to see it, wouldn't we? I mean, it'd be lovely to host a group like that. So if you were to consider that, please do that. But in the meantime, thank you so much for a very entertaining, very, very professionally delivered talk. I've loved all the input in the, I'm sure William has as well, the animation within the PowerPoint discussion there. So thank you again, Simon, very much indeed. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.